Kenneth Richard Frost. I'm from, right now, Excelsior, Minnesota. We're in a farming community just outside of Stockholm, close to Göteborg. And they came in, I think it was 1888 when they came. They said they had the government change their name because everybody was going to southern Minnesota and nobody spoke English. So the government, when they came into Ellis Island in New York, they made them take the name of their hometown, and their hometown in Sweden was Frosta. So they dropped the A and it became Frost, and it was Peterson originally when they came over, but it was kept as Frost. Now, one of the 6 brothers went on to North Dakota, to Pettibone, North Dakota, and stayed with an uncle out there, and he was allowed to keep the name Peterson. So we have Petersons and Frosts that are brothers. And unfortunately, that was back in the early days of the 19th century, or the 20th century, rather. Well, my dad's side of the family was, they're farmers. He had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. They lived about 2 miles out of town, outside of Lesueur. And he graduated from high school in 1927, I think it was, and then he worked on the farm, and he also came in and became an automotive mechanic. He worked there for 57 years before he retired and then died. So his brother was an accountant for the dealership in town, and another brother was a landscaper for the country club. And those 2 brothers went into the Army. My Uncle Myron went to the South Pacific, and my Uncle Mal went to Europe, and he went in on D-Day. My father got a what they call critical skills deferment, because when the first draft came through in January '42, everybody where he worked, with the exception of him, was drafted. So his employer got him a critical skills deferment because of the location of Green Giant. All the farmers were raising their products and everything. They needed to have somebody to repair their tractors in the field. So because of that, Dad got a deferment from the Army, and he got Class A type cards that, you know, he could get all the gas he needed, you know, and this and that and the other thing. My mother said she always had a tough time because as I was growing up, shoe leather was very, very rare, you know, so she had to have these coupons in order to buy me a pair of shoes when my feet got bigger. But it was a tough time. It was really interesting. We used to take the tin cans from grocery stores, and we'd cut the ends off and then flatten them, and the Boy Scouts would come around town collecting them every week to send back and recycle them for the military effort. So it was a very small time. My mother was an only child, you know, so we didn't have any extended family on her side. My grandmother, her mother was a product of Iowa. That's where she was born, and she had an interesting background. You know, she was one of those ladies of the 1800s, you know, that really, well, she kind of personified. She played piano for a vaudeville show type of thing and everything. She played cards. She'd come down when I would be bowling on Saturday nights, and she'd have her dead fox stole on, sitting there smoking cigarettes, you know, like FDR did with the big long holder, you know. And then when I was done bowling, she'd shoot a game of pool with me because her dad used to have a pool hall. She knew how to play pool, and boy, she could clean your clock pretty fast. I grew up during the war, and things were kind of rare at that time. You know, we had a neighborhood fella that owned a grocery store, and he'd get produce in these wooden crates. In those days, they didn't use cardboard. And he would take the wooden crates and he'd create toys for the neighborhood kids. And so I had a series of little cars and little tractors and wagons and stuff like that, you know, that we could play with. You know, I was, well, one of about 4 of us kids in the neighborhood, you know, very, very close, small community type of thing. But every night, Mother said that we'd break the wheels, you know, so she'd have to glue the wheels back together so we'd have something to play with the next day. But after the war, you know, I got into the local thing, the Church Luther League, we were in that, and then I started in Cub Scouts in 1949, and then I went through all the way like you did to get my Eagle, and that's when I was in college and my time with the scouting program stopped. I acted as an advisor for about 2 years afterwards, but then I just grew away from it because I had to transfer to the cities instead of being at Gustavus. So it was an interesting time. I had 2 sisters. I was the oldest, and then my sister Gloria, she was born in 47. My other sister Dorothy was born in 49, and then my brother Paul was born in 54. He died last year in 61. But Dorothy is living in Fort Myers, Florida. She's got BCD, which is a form of Parkinson's, as I understand it. And Gloria lives in Minnetonka, and I live in Excelsior. We're about 2 miles apart. But other than that, I have no more family in the city area.
My name is Bob Pernu. I'm originally from the Iron Range in northern Minnesota. I've moved down to Wisconsin in the last 18 years. I'm a retired school teacher. I taught school for 36 years and I coached for 30 years. And retired in 1991. Been retired now for almost 25 years. And when I retired, I started a wood carving business. Took a class from a lady in Cloquet out of Duluth. And started carving birds. And since I started carving birds in 1991, I've probably done about 3,000 or 4,000 birds. I also do carousel horses, and also do mounted moose antlers, deer antlers, and picked it up as a hobby, so it keeps me busy in my retirement. And I'm married. My wife's name is Betty. I have 4 children, and the oldest one is 60, a daughter that's 59. I also have 9 grandchildren, and also grandkids that live near Amaro, where we live right now. And Brody, just went to a ceremony yesterday, who was an Eagle Scout. Also looks like 2 other boys at that family house are going to be Eagle Scouts. And during my younger days in elementary school, I was also a scout, and when I was teaching school in northern Minnesota, I was also a Cub master up there, and Scout master. So I had a number of years in scouting. My dad was a miner, worked in the iron mines up in northern Minnesota, and right now the mining companies, when they have equipment such as the trucks that they use for hauling ore, or 350 tons at one load, my dad was a blaster, and when they blast in the mines, they blast 1 million pounds of explosives at one time. The pit that we lived close to, where I taught school in Mountain Iron, on the Iron Range, the mining pit there was 18 miles long, 800 feet deep, and 6 miles wide. And when they would blast, sometimes we had to open the doors and the windows of the school, because if you didn't, the concussion from the blasting would break windows. Also, at times, kids were told to crawl under the desk in case the ceiling fell down. But anyway, moving to from northern Minnesota down here, the climate is a lot nicer. The one winter we had in 2000, we had 60 below and 255 inches of snow. Down here we get maybe 50 inches during the whole winter, and very seldom do we get below 0. On my mother's side, first my mother and my dad. My mother was a Finnish Swedish. Her father was in the Spanish-American War, and when they were married, my grandfather was like 32 and my grandmother was 16. A big difference in age. They had 7 children, a set of twins, and he was a tavern owner in Virginia on the Iron Range, and then built the house about 12 miles out of Virginia At that time, the lumber company in Duluth, or out of Virginia, was the largest sawmill in the world, and they would cut 1 million board feet a day out of that sawmill. It was owned by Weyerhaeuser in Spokane, Washington, and he had a house built out of Virginia. The house was completely round, built in 1912. It cost him $12,000 to build it, and he had all the lumber sawed in 20-foot 2x4s and planks, and siding for the outside. For the outside of the house, so he could bend. They had to bend the wood by steaming it in these big barrels of hot water, and they had carpenters making the lumber bend all the way around the house. On my father's side, there's 19 children on the father's side. My dad was about the 7th, I think, out of the 19th, and my grandfather and grandmother lived till my grandmother died at about 83, and my grandfather died about 92. On the father's side, on my mother's side, my grandmother died at 86, and I never did know the grandfather because I was born in 1933, and he died in 1932. So as far as my grandfather on my dad's side, he worked in the mine all his life, and in those days, it was about a 12-mile walk from where they lived to the mine where they used to work, and he used to walk every morning to that pit where they worked 12 miles away, because in those days they only had horse and buggy, and they also had parts of the family that also worked in the mine, and most of the family members were miners in that area. But mining has changed now. It takes very few men to operate either the crushing plants or the heavy equipment, in comparison to the only hand labor they had back in the 1920s and 1930s. I was born in Parkville, a small town right out of Virginia. Went to a small school, no two-story school in that little community, and enjoyed sports. I played football, basketball, and track. I also had the state record in the shot put in college. And compared to nowadays, the training has completely changed. When they're throwing shot puts and discus close to 70 feet, in my day I was lucky to hit 50 feet. Played football also. I played football at high school and college. I also had a football scholarship at Kansas State, and I had a scholarship with room board, books, tuition, and $150 a month spending money. But I was there for about a month. I got hurt. I had my knee tore out, so I dropped out of school there, went back to Minnesota, and finished up at St. Cloud Teachers College, also known now as the Minnesota State College, instead of Teachers College. Enjoyed my career, and no, we live here in a small little town in Omro, which is about 3,000 people, and I've had a great life here. Been married going on 61 years, and over those years my wife has put up with me, running around the countryside, either coaching boys sports or girls sports, and the sports I coach were girls basketball, boys basketball, track, cross country, and when I went to Bemidji, I taught in Bemidji for 1 year. I was also the golf coach there, and had also a track program, helped with the track program, and ran some large meets, which the equivalent of about 25 or 30 teams at one time. And I spent 1 year there, and from there I spent one summer up in International Falls teaching summer school to teachers that did not have a degree yet. But other than that, my teaching career started in Huron, South Dakota. From there I went to Bemidji, and I taught at the college there for a year, From there I went to Roseville, which is up in northern Minnesota, and ended up teaching in the high school where I graduated from for the last 21 years, and that's when I retired.